Greetings, my young math Padawans. This is lesson 4.3, Dividing Polynomials Using Long Division, Part 1. Before we get into this, let me remind you of how we do long division. That's right, we're going to go back to like elementary school when you did and learned how to do a problem like this. 4,274 divided by 23. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to rewrite this using long division. If you remember, we take the dividend, 4,274, and write it underneath of that long division bar with the divisor out front. Now, if you remember what we do, we're going to look to see how many times does 23 go into this number, 4,274. But if you remember, we're going to start with just the first digit, that thousands digits. And we're going to say, how many times does 23 go into 4? Well, if you remember, it doesn't. So we just put a little X up there to kind of mark that nothing's going to go into that. Then we look and we reframe this and see how many times does 23 go into 42. And that, unfortunately, only goes in one time. So now if you remember what we do is we take this number 1 up here, take the number 1, and we're going to multiply it by 23. So we take 1 times 23 and we get 23. And then if you remember, what we end up doing is we end up subtracting 42 from 23, giving us 19. Now, if you remember what we do next, we take this digit, the next digit in our original number, and we bring that straight down. And now we repeat the process. We say, how many times does 23 go into 197? And 23 goes into 197 8 times. We'll repeat the process, 8 times 23, which is 184. We'll end up subtracting 197 from 184. We'll end up with 13. We'll bring down our number, 4. We'll figure out how many times does 23 go into 134. That goes in 5 times. We'll do 5 times 23. We'll get 115. We'll end up subtracting 134 from 115 and getting 19. Now, if you remember, that 19 ends up being the remainder of this problem. So we can finally come up with our answer. What is 4,274 divided by 23? It is 185 with a remainder of 19. Now, let's talk about how to write that remainder. That remainder is the fractional part of 23 that's left over. So it's 185 and 19 23rds. Now, what in the world does this have to do with polynomial division? Well, I'll show you. We're going to take a look at this problem, x to the third minus x squared minus 2x plus 8 divided by x plus 1. We're going to go through and do this process exactly like we did the other one. We're going to take the dividend, which is now a polynomial instead of a number, and we're going to write that underneath of our long division bar. And we're going to take our divisor and stick it out front. So this is what it looks like. Then we're just going to repeat the process, but I think this is actually a little bit easier than long division, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to see how many times does x go in x to the third power, or to say it a different way, what times x will give me x to the third power. I'm going to ignore the plus 1, and I'm going to ignore the rest of this polynomial. It's just going to kind of go along for the ride. So what times x will give me x to the third power? You should be saying x squared. Just like when we did our long division, we're now going to take this number up here, x squared, and we're going to multiply it by what's over here. In this case, x plus 1. So think of it as the distributive property. So x squared times x gives me x to the third power. And x squared times positive 1 will give me positive x squared. I've just distributed the x squared. Now I'm going to go through and do what I did in the previous step. I'm going to subtract. I'm going to take the top and I'm going to subtract it from the bottom. So let me just do this. Now, when I subtract, I just like I did when we were doing the subtraction problems, I like to distribute through my negative sign and then I can just add. I don't have to worry about all of that. So I can do x to the third and think of it instead of minus x to the third, I can think of it as plus negative x to the third. And what should always happen here is those should always cancel out. If they don't cancel, you've probably done something wrong. Now I'll focus my attention here to this. And I have negative x squared plus negative x squared, which gives me negative 2x squared. Great. I will now bring down the next term. Just like I did when I was doing long division with numbers, I brought down the next digit. In this case, I'm just going to bring down the next term. And I'll repeat the process. So I'll figure out what times x will give me negative 2x squared. What times x will give me negative 2x squared? You should be saying negative 2x. That's correct. Because negative 2x times x gives me negative 2x squared. And now I'll do negative 2x times 1, which will give me negative 2x. Just like I did with the last problem, I will now change this to a subtraction problem. And I'll subtract. But again, remember, I like to go through and change my signs. That's going to make life easier for me. What you see here is negative 2x squared plus x squared. Those cancel out. That should always happen. In this problem, negative 2x plus 2x, those also cancel out. That does not always happen. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill out this and give it a 0x, just so I have a placeholder there. Because I'm going to now bring down my next digit, plus 8. And then I'm going to say, what times x will give me 8? I'm going to ignore that 0x. Well, there's nothing that will happen. So I am actually finished this problem. This plus 8 ends up being the remainder. So my answer, let's write out the answer. The answer is going to be x squared minus 2x. I got that from this stuff up here at the top. And then plus the remainder. Plus, always plus, 8 over, what did I divide by? X plus 1. This is going to be the format for my final answer every single time, especially when I have a remainder. If I would have a remainder of 0, this wouldn't be here at all. Whew. I know this process seems a little long. It's not that difficult, though. If you pay attention to detail and you're really precise, this process should go pretty quickly for you. Just take your time. Make sure you're paying attention to positives and negative signs. That's going to be what's going to get these problems right. Let's do another one together. Don't be scared by the format of this problem. It's exactly the same as the last one. 8x to the third plus 18x squared plus 7x minus 3 divided by 4x minus 1. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this problem using my long division bar. Now, I will look and say, just like I did in the last problem, what times 4x will give me 8x to the third power? Should have said 2x squared. Now I'll take this 2x squared and I will distribute it to the 4x minus 1. Then I will go ahead and subtract these two things. Remember, again, I changed my signs just like this. The 8x to the third minus 8x to the third will cancel out, and I'm left with 20x squared. I bring down my next term. And I repeat the process. What times 4x will give me 20x squared? Should have said 5x. So now I will take this 5x and multiply it by 4x minus 1 and get 20x squared minus 5x, which I will turn around and subtract. Again, I'm changing my signs. Those will cancel out. I'm left with 12x. I'll bring down the next term, minus 3. I repeat the process. What times 4x will give me 12x? Should be a 3. I'll distribute. I'll get 12x minus 3. I will change my subtraction signs. Those will cancel. Hey, check it out. That cancels too. The remainder is 0. So my answer, my final answer for this problem, 2x squared plus 5x plus 3. That's it. No remainder, no need to write anything else. Let's do another one. Ooh, this one looks different. X to the third minus 15 divided by x minus 1. When I set this up, the x minus 1 is still going to go there, my long division bar. Okay, here's where you got to be careful. You see how we're missing some terms here? We need to fill those in. I don't like any missing terms. Now, I will tell you, it's not 100% necessary to do this. However, I think when we fill in those missing terms, you're going to find that everything will line up a lot nicer for you when you do that. And I encourage you to do that so that your like terms line up. Without filling in these gaps, it's going to be hard for things to line up. You're going to think things don't go away and get really confused with your numbers. So I would suggest that you fill in the gaps with your 0, x squared, and 0x, especially in problems like this. The process is now exactly the same. Why don't you take a look to see if you can maybe work through the problem on your own? You can, of course, follow along with me, but try it out. Try it out. Maybe you want to pause the video and try it. So I'll go through and say, what times x will give me x to the third? X squared. I'll distribute that in. I will change my signs and subtract. I will bring down my next term. I will now say what times x will give me x squared. I will distribute through. I will change it to a subtraction problem. I will get things to cancel out. I will bring down the next term. Again, what times x will give me x? That one's the easiest one, just a 1. That'll give me x minus 1. I'll go through and I'll change my signs. And I will end up with negative 14 as my remainder. So my answer to this problem, x squared plus x plus 1 plus negative 14 over x minus 1. Okay, we're definitely to that point in the video now where you pause the video and you try these two problems out on your own. And then we, of course, will go over these two problems. So go ahead, pause the video, try these two problems out on your own. Good luck. Remember, pay attention to detail. Make sure you're watching your positives and negatives. Make sure you're subtracting. A lot of things to think about here, folks. Good luck. Pause the video, try these out. As always, I'll take and write the problem out using my long division bar. Then I'll figure out how many times does x go in x to the third. X squared times x plus 3 will give you x to the third plus 3x squared. I'll now subtract them and bring down the next term. Now, what times x will give me negative 2x squared? I'll distribute my negative 2x through. I'll change it to a subtraction problem, and I'll add these two things together, and then bring down my next term. All right, what times x will give me negative 8x? Negative 8, and I'll distribute that through. I'll change it to a subtraction problem and come up with my final answer with the remainder of negative 3. So my answer, x squared minus 2x minus 8 plus negative 3 over x plus 3. One more. All right, x to the third minus 70x plus 2 divided by x minus 5. I'm going to write this out and make sure I fill in my missing term. Now we'll go through my process. What times x will give me 3x to the third? I'll distribute that. I'll subtract. I'll bring down the next term. And now figure out what times x will give me 15x squared. I'll distribute that through. I'll subtract. I'll bring down my next term. I now will look and say what times x will give me 5x. I'll distribute through my 5. I'll subtract. And I will end up with my final answer, which is 3x squared plus 15x plus 5 plus the remainder of 27 over x minus 5. Folks, I hope that this was helpful to you. I know that this process is a longer process than what we're used to doing, but if you pay attention to detail and you make sure you get that subtraction and change your signs there, I think you'll find that this is not as horrible as it actually looks, and you'll get faster at it the more you practice. Good luck, and if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll see you next time.